Hello everyone, Jay Warden here, and welcome to my recap and review of the TNG episode The Naked Now. Do remember that there will be spoilers ahead, so sit back and enjoy this poorly written episode of TNG. We open the episode with Picard believing the Enterprise is travelling at Warp 7, though it's clearly moving at impulse. They've been receiving a bunch of strange messages from a science ship called the SS Tsiolkovsky that's been watching a star about to collapse into a smaller star. We then hear what sounds like a party in the background before a sultry voice asks for all the pretty boys to come over for a blowout, which sounds like it might be a lot of fun until someone actually blows out the airlock and sucks them out into space.
Correction, sir. That's blown out.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Grammar Nazi. With no life signs left, Riker takes an away team over to the Tsiolkovsky and splits everyone up to find out what happened. LaForge finds a bunch of naked frozen people before having one land in his lap. We hear some strange noise as he's touching the corpse, and he looks briefly at his hand before Riker reports back to Picard to confirm that everyone on board is dead. Picard makes a log entry about downloading the research data before expressing concern that the nearby star might explode on them. He joins Troy and Dr. Beverly in sickbay as they look over the data, trying to find out what the fuck happened to make everyone kill themselves, but come up clueless. Picard then orders the away team to come back and get some maximum decontamination. Once back on the ship, Dr. Beverly gives everyone a checkup and says they're all okay, but LaForge is sweating and starts smack-talking her. Dr. Beverly then decides it's best to run some further tests on him just to be on the safe side, and confines LaForge to sickbay. On the bridge, Riker thinks he's heard about someone showering in their clothes in the past and thinks it might be related to everyone on the Tsiolkovsky killing themselves. So he asks Data to do a Google search based on those parameters. Data says that'll take a few hours, but gets started anyway. LaForge gets bored of being confined to sickbay and decides he'd rather be somewhere else, so takes his combat job and leaves. Dr. Beverly comes back to run more tests and realises that she probably should have locked the doors when you're potentially dealing with something infectious, so she informs Picard, who orders a ship-wide search for him. LaForge, it seems, decided to go and visit Wesley for some reason, and he's showing off his homemade tractor beam for a science project. LaForge pretends he's impressed by slapping Wesley on the face. Okay, I only wish he'd slapped Wesley in the face. And we hear that weird sound again as if something has passed between them. LaForge then complains he's really hot and leaves the room and then goes off to another room to stare out at the stars before Yar finds him. He says he's got some pretty wild shit going on in his mind right now, and Yar says, well, I'm just a security chief. But LaForge just wants her help to see like normal people, because having vision superpowers has the drawback of not letting him see how hot a girl might be. He touches her face, we hear that sound again, and Yar says okay, she'll help him by escorting him back to sickbay. A now hot and sweaty Yar quickly updates Picard in sickbay as he quizzes Dr. Beverly about what's going on. Dr. Beverly insists that her instruments show nothing wrong even as Picard presses her to be sure. Troy says she senses confusion in LaForge as if he's somehow drunk, but Dr. Beverly is still just insisting nothing is wrong despite all the evidence pointing otherwise. Back on the bridge, Data says his Google searching is coming up empty, and Riker talks about needles and haystacks, which makes Data confused before rambling and giving Riker an idea about what he's looking for. He then immediately tells Picard he's found what they're looking for despite not actually finding anything yet, so I guess it's just lucky that Data managed to quickly find the Wikipedia entry in time for Picard to see. It turns out that a similar incident happened on Kirk's Enterprise and some water molecules got complicated and did some funky shit that made you feel like you're drunk. Luckily, this info includes a cure, so Picard gets that straight to Dr. Beverly to sort out. Meanwhile, Yar is doing the womanly thing and trying on new clothes, except they're Troy's and not hers. Troy realises Yar isn't behaving like the usual tomboy security chief and expresses concern by touching her, causing that fucking sound again. Honestly, I never knew infections could make sounds like this when they're passed between hosts. Yar, though, is starting to feel horny, so brushes her off and leaves, but Troy remains concerned and informs Picard. As we get a nice shot of Yar's swaying ass, it's clear that other people are starting to get horny too. Picard wants to know why the download from the Tsiolkovsky is taking so long, and Data explains that there's a lot to process. But I suspect, given how horny people are getting, someone is just hogging the bandwidth by downloading a fuck ton of porn instead. In engineering, Chief Engineer Guest Star gets an order from Picard to report to the bridge, and then seconds later the Assistant Chief Engineer also gets an order to report to sickbay. He looks a little confused, but Wesley arrives and says he'll watch over things for him, and probably ignoring all procedure, rules and regulations is okay with this for some fucking reason and leaves. Chief Engineer One Hit Wonder arrives on the bridge to report as ordered, but Picard says that's bullshit and he gave no such order before we hear his own voice over the speakerphone saying he's given command of the ship to now acting Captain Wesley Crusher. Wesley has used his science project to put up a force field to the main controls and engineering, and dumbass twat assistant engineer swears loyalty to his new captain. Wesley lets him in whilst the rest of the engineering staff just hug each other and laugh. Picard orders Riker and Chief Engineer we'll never see again to regain control of engineering, then tries to call security, but instead gets some idiot responding before Yar cuts in and, still sounding quite horny, says she's busy right now, so Picard sends Data to go to Yar's quarters and escort her to sickbay. Once Data arrives, Yar greets him in a sexy outfit with an upside down question mark on her forehead, before giving us an uplifting history of her youth, on the run, avoiding rape gangs, before saying she just needs to get fucked, but in a gentle and loving way. She then inquires about Data's abilities and declares he's fully functional in a broad variety of pleasuring techniques, delighting Yar before she drags him off to her bed to use him as a literal sex machine. Back in engineering, Riker tells Picard that he can't get to the controls and it appears the engines are offline, because the assistant dipshit engineer has pulled out all the control chips and is playing a game of Jenga with them. Chief Engineer name I can't remember says it'll take time, but they'll try to disable the force field. Troy then arrives and is all hot and bothered by how horny the ship is and wants Riker to fuck her. So he does what any man would do when there's a willing, beautiful lady who needs you and takes her to sickbay. Dr. Beverly tries out the cure they found in the database, but it doesn't work and LaForge continues to lament about rainbows and sunsets. As Riker dumps Troy in a bed, he tries to get Dr. Beverly to help by awkwardly touching her neck, but now they're both infected, and despite her trying to quarantine him, as if that's going to do any fucking good at this point, Riker says he has to go save the day or everyone is fucked. Picard tries to convince Wesley to give control back as he needs to put a tractor beam on the Tsiolkovsky, but Wesley is an expert in tractor beams now, and so he does it for him. Data then arrives on the bridge after being used as a living dildo by Yar, and appears to be infected himself. Picard says what we're all thinking and that he's an android and it makes no fucking sense for him to be infected, but Data disagrees and falls over comically. Picard goes to talk to Dr. Beverly in his ready room and she clearly wants an entry from his captain's log, and Picard becomes instantly infected because he starts making strange noises. She goes on about being a woman, implying how he brought back a dead husband instead of a living one and that he owes her some dick. Picard though just manages to keep it together and sends her away. As Worf informs Riker the captain is infected, the staff finally collapses and throws out a big rock towards the Enterprise. Picard tries to order them to move but can't seem to remember how to give orders, so Riker has to do his job for him, even though Riker was infected well before Picard. Chief Engineer What's-Her-Face finally gets the force field down but says to put all the control chips back will take her hours, and they've only got minutes before the big rock hits them, prompting Wesley to suggest Data put them back in because he's super fast. So Riker takes Data down to engineering and gets him on the job. But Data says he probably won't do it in time before Riker notices he's starting to get a little sweaty himself. Picard hops his way down to sickbay to flirt some more with Dr. Beverly, who somehow has managed to finally come up with a new cure and goes to test it on LaForge. This time it works and he starts feeling much better, so she gives Picard the hyperspray and sends him off to engineering to cure the others. Wesley has the idea of doing the same thing he did with his science project and reversing the tractor beam to push rather than pull, which will give Data enough time to finish putting the control chips back in using sped up camera footage. Chief Engineer nobody cares about says that'll take weeks, but Wesley says she has a puny brain and then proceeds to technobabble his way to a solution. Picard then arrives and injects everyone with the cure before Wesley shows just how dumb everyone else is and successfully reverses the tractor beam, pushing the Enterprise away from the Tsiolkovsky. Seconds later it gets destroyed by the big rock, but it buys Data the time he needed to finish putting the control chips back, restoring power to the engines and allowing the ship to get away as the big rock very slowly flies by. With the ship saved and the Enterprise preparing to leave for its next job, Yar nips over to Data and tells him to keep the whole dildo thing quiet, whilst Picard muses that he might end up with a decent crew one day as long as they stop being fucking idiots. So, the one where everyone gets horny. Clusterfuck seems like a very appropriate word for this episode. Where to begin? Well, first let me take you back to a TOS episode called The Naked Time. In that episode, the Enterprise goes to a planet that's breaking up and wants to rescue the science team stationed there. They find instead the life support system shut down and everyone frozen. One of the away team gets infected with something, then starts spreading it around the ship, making them all appear intoxicated. One of the officers takes over engineering and proclaims himself captain. Meanwhile, the ship's orbit begins destabilizing and starts falling towards the planet. Scotty eventually regains control of engineering but finds the engines have been shut down and that there isn't time to restart them before they crash. McCoy finds a serum that works against the infection and goes around with a hyperspray, curing everyone before Scotty makes a last-minute save of the engines to get them out to safety before the planet destroys them. Sound familiar at all? Well, it should, because we just rewatched the exact same episode almost beat for beat. It's even one of the earliest episodes of TOS, coming in at the 4th episode of the first season. It's disappointing that instead of taking this new crew and ship and exploring new stories and ideas, they decided to instead just completely recycle an old episode. The episode tries to be a comedy vehicle half the time as everyone starts acting wacky, but it just doesn't really work because at this point, the second ever episode, we just don't really know any of these characters yet, and for them to start acting out of character loses any impact or meaning. Not only that, but many of the characters are just fucking stupid and make dumb decisions. I mean, as soon as Geordi showed symptoms, he should have been immediately quarantined, and even if he did escape, well then Picard should have just immediately ordered a ship-wide lockdown to stop him getting very far. We know something strange has happened to the crew of the Tsiolkovsky, so it should be foremost in their minds. Instead, Crusher just insists the instruments show nothing wrong with him, even knowing something is wrong with him, and Picard just orders a search instead. And that assistant chief engineer, who, as far as I know, didn't show any signs of being infected yet or having his judgment impaired, just shrugs his shoulders, fucking lets Wesley take over for him in engineering as if it's a perfectly okay thing to do. This guy clearly wins the award for Dumb Fuckwit of the Year and should be immediately kicked out of Starfleet. To be fair, Wesley does shake his hand, thus infecting him, but this instead just brings up how inconsistent this thing is and how quickly it affects you. For example, Picard seems to start acting strangely almost immediately, whereas it took some time before Riker even got sweaty. So, as the infection starts spreading, we spend a lot of time with some of this wacky behaviour. LaForge going on about wanting normal eyesight and waxing poetic about it. Yar going to Troy and trying on her clothes before leaping onto the first guy she likes the look of, and then Troy getting horny for Riker but still being useless, sensing all the confusion as the crew start losing it. Perhaps the only real memorable moment that gets referenced again occasionally in later episodes is that Yar seduces Data and has sex with him, which also ends up infecting him. But again though, this is just fucking dumb. Data is the second officer, he's third in command of the ship, presumably trained to some degree in command and having served for many years in Starfleet, and he has the added advantage of actually not feeling any emotions, but instead he's easily seduced by a scantily clad Yar and ends up being infected himself somehow, and that's just even more bewildering. Okay, yeah, I know he has biomechanical elements to his construction, but I just don't see how this infection would actually affect his positronic brain in the same way it would a human brain, and it just makes no sense except to have some comic relief. I mean, just... As for Picard and Crusher, once infected, they also spend a good portion of this episode just flirting with each other, and it just feels awkward and forced because, besides the whole dead husband thing, there is no other previous connection established here between these two. Well, not yet anyway. Also, Picard makes the strangest noise. I mean, what the fuck is this? It's bothered me every time I've seen this scene. I mean, he's just talking and then just blurts out this random ass noise, and I have no idea what the fuck it's supposed to be or mean. Though I really did love his little hop he does as he goes into sickbay. It's so random, but it made me chuckle. And then there's Wesley. In the Farpoint episode, I commented on how he wasn't actually annoying, and that I even liked the way he was portrayed. That's all thrown out the window in this episode. Taking up a large chunk of screen time, he's insufferably annoying. He's just allowed to wander into engineering with no challenge, then gets the Enterprise both in and then out of its dangerous predicament whilst making all the adults look stupid. The only thing I kinda liked here was the exchange between him and Picard on the bridge. Just watching Picard trying to sweet talk him into giving back control of his ship was, that was kinda fun. I liked that. Anyway, about the only three characters who keep their heads screwed on the entire episode are Riker, Worf, and Chief Engineer McDougal. Or should I say the Enterprise's first Chief Engineer, because we won't see or hear from her ever again after this episode. Riker somehow manages to be the only smart adult on the ship, and even once he's infected, continues to work the problem until the very end without giving into its effects, instead just looking a little sweaty and tired. I did like the early exchange between him and Data on the bridge as he tries to find out what was going on. It was, for a brief moment, a nice bit of character building between the two. Worf again is just there throughout the episode, but I did find myself curious how he might have reacted to the infection because he doesn't really strike me as the happy drunk sort. Well, I think that concludes my thoughts to this episode. A clusterfuck of horny shite, and I'm afraid it's not going to get any better in the next episode, Code of Honor. Thank you for watching, please do like, subscribe and share, and I will see you next time. This has been Jay Warden, signing off.